lecture part. And I will share the screen again. There you go. Give me a second. Tá aqui, né? Okay, now where are we? Where are we? I'm lost. Oh, there you go. So the lecture today is about reproduction and social structure. Okay, so now we're moving from we had this three-part series of lectures. The first ones were about evolution, how did marine animals evolved, what groups are there, and then we move to biology and we look at echolocation, we look at thermoregulation, diving, and now we're moving into the ecology part. And I've decided to start with this lecture on the reproduction and the social organization because I think it makes more sense to start here. Now, I'm going to go briefly through this, just pointing out the major themes, and I promise to record a more extended section to develop each of these elements sometime during this week. So I like to start this this lecture with this song by Tina Turner. And last year when the students were going into the classroom and sitting and etc., Tina Turner would be singing this song. You're maybe too young to know this song, but who knows? Maybe you do know it. And the interesting part about this song, and in the way it relates to the subject of this lecture, is how the poem. So she is obviously going through so this song is about a lady who is going through, who had her heart broken with a love affair, okay? And so she still feels something for this other guy, but she's trying to separate the physical from the emotional. So he said, you must understand that the touch of your hand makes my pulse react. So she still feels something, but then she says that's only the thrill of boy meeting girl, the opposite, that attraction of the opposites. It's just physical. It's even logical, she says. And so she's telling this guy that this has nothing to do with love. Okay, that's the title of the song. What's love got to do with this? And so this is interesting to illustrate how many layers you can have on this issue of a basic reproductive function, which is reproduction, right? And this other cartoon illustrates again this point from another angle. I mean, if you look at evolution, and as you may know by now, I think evolution is the key to understanding anything in biology and even outside biology. If you look at the principles of natural selection, these are the three keys, the three key elements for the survival of any species. And if eat, survive, and reproduce, we are humans. We tend to we put lots of layers in top of what is basically these three impulses: eat, survive, and reproduce. And if you think about it, the basic instinct, not the basic instinct, the most important element here for the survival, evolutionary survival of a species is reproduction. So an animal eats and survive, eats to survive, and needs to survive to reproduce. okay? And animals that fail to reproduce, are left out of the evolutionary course. Okay? So reproduction is key in evolution. That's basically what I wanted to say. Of course, us being very developed animals, we have then developed a series of layers over this simple basic function, okay, of reproduction. And these two books are very, have marked me very much. I found them very interesting. The first one, Why is Sex Fun? This is the oldest, and it was the first one I read. And it's really, it looks like a funny question, but it's actually a very deep one. Why do we like sex, right? And of course, the short answer is, if we didn't, I mean, if we don't, we will not reproduce, and we will be left out in the dustbin of biological history, right? So each of us is the descendant of a long line of people and then animals that liked sex. Okay. The other book is about the culture of sexual relationships in prehistory. Okay, and it's a very interesting book. And if you have the time, many of these books can be pirated. If you have the time, just give them a look. So let me just jump. I had the first section here. I will develop it later on. Another issue is of why we have sexual reproduction. Okay, sex. And I have this slide here with the selection of with this overview of the evolution of life on the planet, to show that for sexual reproduction, where is it? It's not even marked here, but sexual reproduction is associated with eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, bacteria, do not have sexual reproduction. And the early eukaryotes also didn't have sexual reproduction. But in some way, sexual reproduction is linked to the explosion in the diversity of life on the planet. Okay? Life emerged shortly after the Earth was livable, and so life is an emergent property of the biology of carbon, of the chemistry of carbon, and so life is very old. Life has more than 4 billion years in American language, 4,000 million years old. But sexual reproduction is probably just 1,000 million years. So for about 3/4 of the life on Earth, there was no sex. And then sex appeared, and together with sex, you have this huge diversity of life. So sex had something to do with it. But I will skip this, and I'll promise I will develop this later on. But an important thing here for what I want to cover today is, let me just put the clock here, is this principle. So we are, the mammals. Now let's go back a few steps. Mammals are descendants, are the results of this process of evolution. And when mammals picked up, they were already on a path, on evolutionary path that marks their behavior. And the pattern is, for instance, that mammals have internal fertilization, right? So, and females bear the burden of raising the young ones, okay, internally. So you have, the very early mammals, monotremates, they lay eggs, but then you have the marsupials, which have these little babies, almost like fetus, that are born very primitive, but then it's the female that keeps them on their pouch. And then you have the placental mammals, in which the female carries the baby until it is very well developed. So this is an evolutionary heritage from mammals, which affected the marine mammals, and makes this Bateman principle a very relevant one, which is females and males have different games to play, right? In more ways than one. And in this particular case, in males, there is what Bateman proposed is that males have this relationship between mating frequency and relative fitness. If you define fitness as the contribution for the next generation, then a male fitness increases with the mating frequency, because there's just in the limit you just need one mating to fertilize a female. So and that can be it, and then you can move on to another female, and the more females a male mates with, the higher the probability it will leave descendants to the next generation. Now with females, it's not that simple, right? Because in a short term, females just need one mating as a limit again, in order to pass their genes to the next generation. But her work starts there, where the male work finishes, because then she will have all the pregnancy, and then she has the gestation, and then she will have all the raising of the youngs until she's able to mate again. So so males and females in mammals are locked into this, not conflict, but complementarity. They have different goals and different objectives, and this results in different strategies. So the second point I wanted to make is that is related to this scheme, which has some years already. This was made by a biological theoretical mind called Cluttenbrock, where he looked at the mating systems in mammals and tried to make a taxonomy of it. Because if you look at the bottom of the slide here, you will see that there are many mating systems. And this, I have the link for the paper, and if you have the time to look at the paper, you will see that there's interesting information there. For instance, now I only have here the male mating system, but of course there's a corresponding female mating system. But if we look at the male mating system here, you will see many options, okay? It goes from monogamy, where there's a link, at least a temporal link between one male and one female, to polygyny, where there's a link between one male and several females. And this polygyny can be just one male and several females, or it can be several males with several females, which would be the multi-male polygyny, to a situation of promiscuity, where there are no bonds, no permanent bonds, not even temporal bonds between, except the mating, between males and females. So you have a panoply. Okay, there is something that is missing from this panoply. What is it? Just looking at the bottom of the screen here, this list here covers almost all the possibilities except one.
Homosexual relationships, maybe?
Yes. Okay, so that makes two. That makes two that are missing. Yeah, but I was just thinking from the point of view of reproduction. The evolution and persistence of homosexuality is a very interesting evolutionary question, but we'll leave that aside. What is missing here is polygamy. Polyandry, where you have a situation of one female with several males. It's absent here. And the reason it's absent here is because of the Bateman principle. So there's no need for a female to associate permanently with a group of males and to dominate a group of males just for our own purpose. It may be interesting, but we're getting to, again, one of those levels which we do not need to address at this stage. So anyway, so it's complicated, right? And you can have promiscuity in a large array of settings. And why would you have unimale polygyny and multimale polygyny? So Cluttenbrock had this insight of managing to classify to make some logic on how these patterns of reproduction occurred. And very briefly, what he says is you can see that there's different layers, okay, at or different questions that are addressed before we get to the bottom. Oops, sorry. The first question is male assistance needed for rearing young? Okay, which means, are males needed for the successful raising of the young or not? Okay, if males are needed, then this leads to monogamy. Okay, to say it on the other way, in situations of monogamy are situations where the female cannot raise the young alone. So so it's in the interest of the male to not go out and look for another female, because then his youngs will die and he has to stay with the female to help raise the youngs. And this is the case where you have obligate monogamy. Okay, that's what happens in birds, most birds. Okay, you know, the female stays with the eggs, and so for a long time, and she needs to go out to eat, but the eggs cannot get cold, so the male has to keep the eggs warm too. And then when the young are born, they need to feed, they need food, and the female alone cannot bring all the food that they need, so it's a teamwork. And in some mammals, in no marine mammals this happens, but in some mammals you do have obligate monogamy. Not very common, but it occurs. Now, so most of the other situations occur when male assistance is not required for rearing of young, meaning that the females bear all the burden and the males have all the fun. Now, and then we move to the second question, which is then, of course, there being an equal sex ratio of males and females. If for a male to have on average more than one female, this means that another male will have no female. Okay, so now there's a question of defending the access to females. Okay, so if a male wants to mate with more than one female, he has to stop other males from mating with his females. Okay, and now that leads us to the second question: can the male defend an area, okay, or not? If the male can defend an area where the females are, then he can mate with all the females in there. And if another male tries to come in, he will chase it. Okay, and so that's an important element. And this is where I've put these little symbols here. Oh, sorry, I've put them in myself. And this is where many of the otarids fit in. Okay, otarids, because in pinnipeds have to come to shore to give birth, and pinnipeds have to come to shore to give birth, and otarids in particular have very long rearing periods. The young take weeks, sometimes months, before they can go back. They can go into the water and follow their mothers or live an independent life. So females are stuck on land for a relatively long period. And a male can defend a certain territory. And if a male can defend a certain territory, it will be able to mate with all the females in that territory. Yes, thank you for switching off the microphone. So and then depending on the behavior of the females, then you have different male mating systems. And in otarids, most of the cases, the female groups are relatively small, and so you have a situation where you have unimale groups. So you have a male dominating a relatively small group of females. In practice, this means that males control sections of the beaches where the females go, and they fight one another. The males fight one another to keep at a distance, and they mate with all the females that are in that section of the beach that they control. Now, in situations where the females do not have a fixed area to stay, which gives us all the cetaceans, and because they don't need to come to land, then there's no way for a male to defend the territory. Okay, but the male sometimes can defend a group of females. And you have this situation where, so you have another question there. Are the female groups stable? Are the female groups unstable? Or are there no female groups? The last situation to the right is there are no female groups. The females are solitary. Or they are widely and unpredictably distributed. And in this case, this is where sperm whales fit. Okay. In a sperm whale, you have females that are, well, they're not solitary, but they are widely dispersed. You have a group of females here, you have a group of females there. And so what males do is that they rove an area. So they go from they cross the area looking for receptive females. They try to mate with them. In the process, they chase, when they do find a group, they chase other males to get access to those females in that area in that specific moment in time, and then they move on. So that's a promiscuous situation where there are no permanent bonds between males and females, but it results from this roving pattern, from this roving male mating strategy. Now, the other situation is when you have, when you have groups that are stable, and they have a home range, a sort of a home range, okay? And then this is where things get complicated. Then we're not going to go into these details, except to talk about these two levels of promiscuity here, where I've placed the seals and I've placed the humpback whale. Now, in seals they have to come to land anyway. Often the period that they spend on land is very short. So most of the mating takes place in the sea itself. Okay, and so we have situations there where in a certain area you have many females, and this leads to a situation that you have there with clustered mating territories, or even leks. A lek, I have a slide here. I don't know why I put this slide here. A lek is something like this, where males display for the females together. Okay, so this is, the females are in this area for some reason. Perhaps it's a good area to lay their eggs. So the females are there. They do not form groups. The males cannot defend this territory from other males, but the females are there. And so the strategy for the males is to display themselves. They put their best suits, they sing, or they dance, or they make nice I'm talking about birds mostly here, or they make these nice nests with shiny pieces of glass or metal that they'll collect somewhere, or nice flowers, trying to show the females how good they are and how happy they would be if they would mate with them. So that's a lek. And you have leks, in humpback whales. You know, the songs of humpback males are a sort of are an example of an oceanic lek, where you have in an area you have many males singing, presumably for the attention of females. Okay, so you know, the main point with this slide is to show that there is a system on this organization of the mating systems. Okay, now I'll go very briefly, although we still have some time. Okay, I'll still have some time. But anyway, we have some ground to cover here. So, giving this overview, let's go and have a look at the consequences of this for social structure. So this lecture is about reproduction on one hand and social structure on the other. So giving these constraints, evolutionary constraints on the reproduction patterns, how does this reflect on social structure? Taking into account that social structure is not only marked by reproduction, but with other issues that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So, pinnipeds then, to start with. This is a very interesting paper also, and it allows me to talk about one consequence of these reproductive arrangements, and that is sexual dimorphism. Okay, one of the features that you see in many mammals is differences in size between males and females. I'm not just talking about differences in feathers, like in birds, or differences in color patterns, like in some mammals. I'm talking about differences in size, and sometimes they can be huge. I mean, we can see here, I guess you can see my cursor here. In elephant seals, for instance, males are 3 or 4 times the size of the females. In sperm whales, males are much larger than females, and this is in gorillas, males are much larger than females. Why is that? The explanation for this sexual dimorphism has to do with polygyny. Specifically, it has to do with the need of males to fight one another for access to the females. Okay, so in animals that in pinnipeds, particularly in the species like the otarids that mate on land, their strategy is one strategy of control of territory, right? So the females have to shelter on beaches, and the males can defend one small beach or a small area in a larger beach. And defending means fighting other males. And so the bigger they are, the stronger they are, and the more efficient they are in defending these territories. And so their fitness is larger. So in evolutionary terms, this means that this method of this polygyny favors sexual dimorphism, favors in particularly males that are larger than females. The larger, the better. Okay, and so this happens in all otarids, and it also happens in the elephant seals because they also mate on land. Okay, now in the animals that mate, in the rest of the seals that mate on the sea or on ice, the dimorphism is not so is not so marked. Okay, there is a much smaller pressure for controlling of territory. There is much less fight between males, and so although the situation is still one of may have some polygyny but not much, and so there are other alternatives, like legs, for instance, like female. In some cases, males look for a specific female because they not only give birth on ice, but they stay on the ice a very short period, say a couple of days, a week at the most. And so one of the main strategies I forgot. I think it is in the hooded seal, but I'm not sure. One of the strategies is the Vedal seal. It doesn't really matter. One of the strategies is for the males to rove around looking for females that are on the ice with their pups, and the male stays with the female, mates with her, eventually chases other males away, and mates with that female, and then she goes back to the ice, and the male continues looking for another female. So this will give you some selection pressure for dimorphism, but not much. Okay, and then in other animals, in most of the species of seals, and in all of the walrus, there is no difference between males and females. Sometimes you may even have females that are larger than males. And that is a situation where the females are big because they need to store lots of fat in order to transmit all this energy to their little pups, so that in literally less than 1 week, in one case, they go from birth to changing their fur and being completely aquatic animals and going back in the water with their mothers. Okay, so that's for the pinnipeds, and that's also a note about the dimorphism, the sexual dimorphism. So what I have here is a few notes. I haven't had the time to put this very clearly, but some of the things here I've already said. I could have said it with this slide, it would be better. So if you, in pinnipeds, you can have a polygyny by defending an area, a resource. In this case, the resource is a territory, and then this will give you sexual dimorphism. In places like the hooded seal, I thought it was the hooded seal, you have this situation of polygyny by guarding a partner, and there you can have some sexual dimorphism. But in most other situations, males do not fight each other, and so there's no need to being bigger. Now, in odontocetes, we also have, so odontocetes, you do not have any territory defense. Okay, maybe, but it's not so obvious. And the reason why I'm saying this is because in the resource dolphins, for instance, where Karen Hartman is doing an excellent work in Pico Island, she has shown that you have multi-male groups in Pico. Okay, now let me go back a little bit to this Klutenbrock scheme, and where you have multi-male groups, let me say here, is when you can have female, is when you can defend a certain area, okay, from other males, but the female groups are too large, or as we now think, the area is too large to be defendable by just one male. And so you have multi-male groups. Another form of having multi-male groups is when the female range or core area is not defensible, but the female groups are stable. And so if one male cannot control a group of females, but multi-males can, okay? So these are the two situations where you can have multi-male groups. And in resource dolphin, what Karen has shown is that you have multi-male groups. So going back in the Clutton-Brock diagram, this means that these males are defending something. So they are associating with, there's a group of males that are associating to prevent other groups of males from accessing females that in some way they control. And we think, and I have helped Karen publish some of this, we think that this has to do with shelter, meaning that females tend to return every year to certain areas of the coast where they're either sheltered or they find easier access to food or both. And so it's predictable in the sense that females tend to come to this particular area for giving birth every year. Not females do not give birth every year, but every year there will be a group of females in this area giving birth and staying for a while the young are small. And we believe this is what's involved, and this has led to the development of these multi-male groups in resource dolphins. Karen is trying to do now, she's actually working now with big difficulties, because getting funds for research, particularly if you're not, even if you're affiliated with a research group, but if it's worse if you're not, getting funds for research is complicated. But what she's doing now is she's focusing on these groups. The name of the researcher is Karen Hartman. There you go. You can look up her name on Google Scholar, and you'll see the papers.
I think she has picture on Maniset, right?
Sorry?
She also put picture on Maniset, I think. I saw her name.
Oh, maybe. Yes, maybe.
But thanks. I will look up the paper. Thanks.
Great. So there you go. And so the society, the social structure of resource dolphins is this. So you have fluid groups of females. We do not think, now to assess this you need DNA, right? Or you need photo identification. But we do not think that there's a rigid groups of females. So females are dispersed. They tend to go to these areas to give birth when the time is right, and but they always come to the same areas. And so from the male side, you have these multi-male groups. And what Karen is trying to assess is how are these multi-male groups formed? Are they brothers? Why? Because if you're sharing, if you need other males, thinking in evolutionary terms, if you need other males to guarantee access to females so that you can spread your genes, then you as a male have to be very picky on selecting who is partnering with you, right? And so we would tend to believe that these multi-male groups have some genetic links between them, say like being brothers or cousins, in the sense that I mate with this female and you mate with this female, and anyway, some of our genes will be transmitted to the next generation. So we're betting that these multi-male groups are related, but this is something that still needs to be assessed. Now, in two other groups of cetaceans, odontocets, you have a different set of constraints. And this is the fact that the societies, that you have long raising periods. So an animal takes many years until it is adult and autonomous. So it needs his mother's care for several years. So that's one thing. And particularly in the case of sperm whales, because the sperm whales dive so deep to feed, and the kid and the small and the cubs cannot dive that much. So sperm whale females have this problem to solve. I need to eat and I need to feed this baby, but to eat I must dive to 1,000, 2,000 meters deep and stay there for 1 hour while the baby stays up in the surface, being exposed to predators. Okay, so in the case of sperm whales, this has led to matriarchal societies based on mutual care of the babies. So basically what you have is societies, groups composed of females. These females are related by blood, their sisters, their cousins, their aunts, and they share oh shit. Obrigado. I don't know. Sorry, can you hear me now? I think. Yeah, thank you. There's something with my computer. It just switches off the microphone, and it just switches off the microphone and the speakers. I don't know why. Okay, sorry. So let me go back a little bit. I was talking about the sperm whale societies. In how did you get the part where they have a matriarchal society of closely related females that look after the babies while they'll take turns feeding, right? Okay, so
Explain for the orca, because I don't think we got it.
oh, I will go back to the orcas.
Okay. The cut component.
Okay, so in terms of the sperm whales, the other big factor besides reproduction is raising the young. And so the solution, the evolutionary solution that they found was cooperation between a group of females in raising the young. And then, but then for some reason in this society, males would be disruptive. And so what happens is that when females reach the maturity stage or near the maturity stage, they leave the group. Something similar happens with elephants, for instance, but on a different scale and for different reasons. But then females stay in the group with their mothers, with their aunts, and females and males just leave the group. First, they form bachelor groups, groups of small males, and these groups get smaller and smaller as they grow, and then they start competing with each other, as I explained, for access to the groups of females. So they become roving males, big males, roving the ocean looking for groups of females to mate, and chasing other males when they found them. So there you go, males fighting other males. So this leads to big males, sexual dimorphism, and a situation where roving males happen because the females are in groups, but they are dispersed in the middle of the ocean. Now, for orcas, the situation is a bit different. And for some reason, which there may be some bibliography, but I am not aware of it. But for some reason, males stay in the group. Okay, so it's still a matriarchal society. It's led by an alpha female, and it's based on cooperation between females in raising the young, again. But in this case, because, and I'm just speculating here, but in this case, because their feeding method is so much based on teamwork. Now, if they're chasing fish, they need to form groups and they need to circle the fish so that everybody can have an opportunity to eat. Or if they're chasing, and if I'm certain you've seen these videos of orcas chasing seals on ice, where several orcas swim and they make a wave to turn ice blocks and make the seals fall on the water. I'm guessing that because their society depends so much on teamwork for food, males remain in the group. And so you have a matriarchal society in the sense that who calls the shots are the females, the old females, but males are allowed in the group. This leads to issues of inbreeding. And that's something that groups, all animals groups, have had to deal with. Ways of avoiding mating between close relatives, because you've learned genetics because of the danger of increasing homozygoty in damaged genes, and so it looks like the most of the matings in orca societies are made outside of the clan, because they have a society where you have a clan. The way this works is that you have, imagine a small group of females with her leading female, and then her daughters, and then her granddaughters. And when this big female dies, her daughters form separate pods. Okay, within a clan, they're all descendants of this big old female, but the female is now dead, and now each of her daughters leads her own pod and becomes the alpha female of these pods. And when she goes old and she dies, her daughters will be alpha females and lead her own pods. So we have a sort of a pyramid. There's a clan, and there's recognizable clans in orcas, and the group that is going to talk about language will eventually talk about this. So there's a lineage there. There's a pedigree where you have where you can trace the genetic links between these different pods and class them into clans, and then this is very interesting, because then each clan has a long evolutionary history, and that's why you have orcas that feed mainly on fish, and then you have orcas that feed mainly on pinnipeds, and then you have oceanic orcas that feed mainly on whales, and this results from this social structure, but it also reinforces this social structure, because the alpha female has the responsibility to look after her clan, and so she has all the memories and all the learning she had with her mother and her grandmother on how to lead the group where to feed, how to feed. So these tendencies tend to reinforce themselves in evolution. Now to close this, now for baleen whales, the situation is not so they're not so social, okay? And they're not so dependent on the social structures. They're more solitary animals, and so they're basically promiscuous. They have a promiscuous system of mating, where you don't have nothing similar to permanent bonds. In the case of the humpback whale, we know that there are leks. You know that they have this situation where males group together and they sing, presumably to attract the females on their migration routes and etc. But we know very little about the reproduction and the mating rituals of any of the other baleen whales. What we do know is, but there are two interesting facts. The first one, there is dimorphism, but in this case, the dimorphism is on the female side. Okay, the females in baleen whales tend to be larger than the males, and this has to do with the need to feed the young, right? And so they tend to be big, so they have lots of reserves, because that they feed only about half of the year, and in particular they give birth when they are not feeding, and for the first months of the baby lactating, they do not feed, and so they have to have huge reserves, and this leads to greater success if the female is bigger. So there you go. So you have this dimorphism for selecting for big females, big fat ladies. What you also have is, we know, males have huge testicles. They're really huge, and believe it or not, the size of the testicles are also an indication of the reproductive structure of the society. So that if you have big testicles like you find in the mysticets, means that there's sperm competition. Okay, what does this mean? It means that the female will not be choosy. She will mate with as many mates as possible, or as she wants, basically. Okay, but then so a male is guaranteed to mate, or it's easy to find a mate, but there will be other males also finding the same mate. So it's a fun system. But then how do you make sure that you get the final shot? So now that the decision of what genes are passed along to the next generation is taken inside the female body. Okay, so it's not just access to the female. You have access to the female has access to you. So the competition happens inside the body, and it's called sperm competition, which means that then the decision is taken. So the males that produce more sperm get a larger chance of impregnating the egg, and so the bigger the testicles, the bigger the amount of sperm they can produce. So there you go. This leads to big testicles. And on the other hand, if a species has big testicles, like you find in dolphins, and let me just close this lecture. I don't think I have a slide here. This is something else. I don't think I have a slide here for dolphins, but I will mention them. In dolphins, we find the same. We find relatively big testicles in these animals, which means we know very little about the mating patterns of most of the species. We know something about bottlenose dolphins, a lot, actually, but very little about, or nothing about common dolphins. But what we do know is that they must be promiscuous, because males have such big testes, right? So it means that there is sperm competition and access to the females. So the decision of what genes are passed on is taken inside the body of the female. Okay, so that leaves us. I will stop here. There's an element here also about things that have to do with lactating strategies, but I will leave this to the next class. Well, sorry, to the class that I'm going to record. So we must stop here. We have some time for a few questions if you have some.
I only have questions about the practice.
About, sorry?
The practice.
Sure. Sorry, sorry, Laura, give me a second. Are there questions about this lecture part? Okay, so the practical work. Yes, Laura.
For next week, we have to do the maps of the movements, only that.
And yes, next week, well, the ideal is if you come up next week with the maps already done. Okay?
Okay.
So we're going to have a tutorial sometime this week so that you can organize the data and do the calculations. Because doing the maps, you will see, is very simple. It's just importing. If the data is organized, you just import it to QGIS, and in 2 minutes you have your map, right? So the important part is filtering the species, filtering the data sets, just making sure that we have the beginning and end of sighting, and then extracting the direction and the speed and the distance and the time from this data. So if you can come to the class next week with this sheet prepared, then doing the maps is easy. And the idea is that next week we'll look at the data, look at the results, and see for each group in which direction you could take the analysis one step further.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so so next week, just the very, very, very final thing. Is there a day this week where you would have time for this practical tutorial? I have a very busy schedule until Thursday, but then either Thursday or Friday, I could take 1 hour and discuss this with you. It's probably difficult to see this here. Would Thursday morning be a good time? Say 9. Is there anyone that cannot do it Thursday?
Classes on Thursdays in the morning.
Sorry?
I have classes on Thursday morning. I can't.
Thursday afternoon.
Me too.
Temos ecotoxicologia.
Okay, I will put a module on Moodle so that everybody can say the days and the time that they are available, and I will try to match it to schedule this in a time that is most convenient to anybody. And if anybody is not able to attend, we can make a second tutorial, no problem. Okay, so I'll put this doodle on Moodle. Put a doodle on Moodle, that's funny. Okay, people, please put the recording of this class about diving in equalization online. Yes, I think I did. I think I've already did, Stephanie.
Okay, because I was looking yesterday, I couldn't find it.
I have it, but I will check. So I have it, and I believed I had put
You
it.
have the recording because I remember you recording the class, and I was trying to find it. I wanted to listen again, and I couldn't find it.
Okay. So